Good day, and welcome to our latest in the PowerWar saga. Um, where we left the project last, the um, general gameplay loop for war is relatively completed, and we now need, besides multiple bug fixes, we need to sort out working out the poker logic. And I can say that one of the reasons why this failed as a game jam project for me was figuring out the poker logic. Um, People with a lot of knowledge of C++, C sharp, um, could probably repurpose some of the many poker libraries that exist uh, with a bit of knowledge and tinkering, neither of which I have. I do understand basic syntax and stuff, but importing libraries and stuff like that, making them work with Godot are beyond what I know. So I had to make this from scratch. Um, the general approach that I took was making it so that it goes through each type of hand in sequence. So it's starting with the royal flush slash straight flush and then working down to four of a kind and etc. all the way down to high card in sequence and then assigning a value to that hand. Um, it was actually uh, kind of an epic task to do for a 1 week day jam, a 1 week game jam. So um, what I ended up doing when for this project was first I decided to make a separate project just for the purpose of doing this. So I'm just going to walk you through the card logic. Um, so to start out with, you can see I have a lot of these commented out. They were basically set hands that were made to test each of the sequences, but ultimately, um, originally I had this so that I could make an entire deck to duplicate the deck of our original project, but ultimately for testing it was more sensible to just have the 7 cards that would be fed into the function in order to analyze the hand and determine its hand strength. So um, ultimately, you would want to start with probably a straight flush and work your way down. So just to kind of walk through how everything is created. So right now, these variables, card values, and card suits have to be put in as an array. So for the 2 pair one, as you can see, I have 2 1s which represent aces and 2 12s which represent, I want to say jacks, no, queens. Um, and then the card suits down here. So the essential variables that we're going to need is we're going to need access to a deck, and we're going to need access to the whole cards of whoever's being analyzed, as well as the table cards. And the general variables that we're going to need is the best hand, which is going to literally be the hand combination of 5 cards that is the best hand that is generated. To tell you the truth, I didn't end up actually using this variable within the game, so this might not be necessary, and when we refract factor, I may take that out of the functionality. The hand rank, so ultimately when we're playing, when it compares the 2 cards, the enemy card and the player card, if one of them has a higher hand rank, then it just automatically wins. The main value, which will be a card value from 1 to 14 that will represent, like, for example, if you had 2 pairs, aces and eights, this main value would represent the ace and would be a 14. The second value in that aces and eights example would be the eights, and then the kicker would be the other card. The fourth and fifth card are actually only used in situations when we're comparing, for example, 2 flushes, which could be a variety of cards, and at that point the fifth card might actually be the tiebreaker, or more likely a high card situation where neither player has any real hand and they both just have a high card. It might go down to the value of the fifth card to see which of those breaks the tie. Um, So ultimately, the way this little example program works, and I want to be importing this into the actual game, so you don't necessarily have to duplicate this project, but I thought it would be interesting to show uh, just an easy method to isolate uh, some sort of function within a game in order to test it before actually implementing it without having to worry about all of the other functions, and gives you more room to play with. In this particular case, it was particularly useful because I wasn't 100% sure how I was going to implement it in the game. So this allowed me to kind of experiment a little bit more. Ultimately, first thing it's going to do is make the deck, which is exactly like the make deck function within our deck in the main project. And it's going to go through all of the cards. So um, in this particular case, it's going to look through what we gave it here, the card values and the card suits, and it's going to turn them into a card. Our card object in the actual project has many other variables relating to which icon it's displaying, etc., but they're not needed in order to test this functionality, so I just cut them out. So ultimately, first it's going to make a deck, and then after that, it's going to draw 5 cards for the table and 2 cards for the whole cards, and then it's going to do this evaluate hand function, which is where we get into the meat of what we're trying to accomplish. So the give cards thing is again a function we already have inside there, so I'm not going to go explaining it, but the evaluate hands thing requires knowing the table cards and the whole cards that a player has. And the first thing it's going to do is going to build all the possible combinations based on those table cards and whole cards. So as a reminder of how poker works, or how Hold'em works specifically, your hand is built of 5 cards, but it's based on a combination of your whole cards and the table cards. So it's possible to use 1 whole card and 4 table cards, or 2 whole cards and table cards. It's also possible to use nothing but table cards, which is illustrated up here. So ultimately, I had to strong arm this, and it's basically I'm going to create a array called combos here, which is going to be the return, and it's going to be an array of all of the possible combinations. So the first combo is going to be all the table cards, and then these ones are all the combos with just the first whole card. And these ones are going to be all the combinations with just the the second whole card, and then this one's going to be with both whole cards and then that particular combination of table cards, etc. So these are all the possible combinations of cards that you can make with those 7 cards to make a 5-card hand, and then it'll return it. So after it's done creating that, it's going to start doing the checks. So the way the checks works is as it goes through the check, if it finds a straight flush, it's going to assign a value of 9 to it. And then for the rest of it, it'll go through and check. So if the hand rank is less than 9, remember it starts out at 0. So in other words, if it hits 9, then it's just going to stop there, and it's going to have evaluated the hand, and then it'll go through, and if it finds a quad, it's going to change the value to 8, and it'll stop there, etc. And this seemed to be the most efficient way. Keep in mind too that like people have been working on poker hand evaluation software for years. Like people have done like the computer science doctorates and stuff on that, and it's a beaucoup dollars if you can make really efficient algorithms for this. And this one isn't particularly elegant, and I wouldn't be using it if I was making an online poker site or something like that, since this would not be the best way to do it. But for a game like this is actually perfectly fine. And it's probably the most basic way to evaluate poker hands. So I'm going to go through my checks here. The first one's a straight flush check. And you can see I have lots of print statements in here that were mostly in there for checking, for testing. But it's going to go through. So basically, card combos, as we saw, was a combination of all the possible types of hands. And hands indicates each combination that it goes through. So the first thing it's going to do for a straight flush is going to do an ace check for a straight. So what this function does, the ace check straight, which is way down here, let's see if I can find it quickly. Ace check straight is going to check to see if the ace value should be low or high, depending on the combination of cards, and it basically checks to see the fourth card to see if its value is less than or equal to 4. And because the only time the low value during a check for a straight is a value is if you have a straight that goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the ace would become the 1. And ultimately, all it's going to do is it's going to check to see if that's a possible hand combination based on what that value is, if it's possibly a low straight. Because at that point, as far as the straight value is concerned, it doesn't matter if it's a 1 anymore. And ultimately, so it has this other thing in here to see if the value is already 14 and stuff. It's not necessarily relevant in this thing, in this particular case for the straight flush check. If ace low is true, then what we're going to do is we're going to iterate through all of the cards and we're going to change the value to low. So if the card value is 14, which is the high value for ace, it's going to switch it to 1. And if ace isn't low, then obviously it's going to do the reverse of that. And then after that, it's going to do a sort by value custom sort. All right, so that one's pretty straightforward. That part's pretty straightforward. After that, it's going to use a straight evaluate on it to see if there is a straight. The straight evaluate needs to be fed the actual 5-card hand, and yeah, so if straight evaluate and straight not found. So if it evaluates it as a possible straight and a straight hasn't yet been found, so this is the first possible straight out of all of the card combos. So it is possible to get multiple straights out of the various combos, and one straight might be higher than the other. So this basically finds the first one. And then I'm going to go through the straight evaluate in a second, but straight evaluate basically just confirms that they sequentially climb up. For example, value of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for all 5 cards would be a straight. And then it will turn that hand into the best hand variable. So it will store that hand saying this is the best hand we found so far. The main value, which is basically the value of the highest part of that straight. So if it's an ace high straight, then that value would be 14. Again, the print statements are all there for testing to make sure everything's working good. And then the same with this print statement. Print card value is a function that I added. I think I've used it before, but basically goes through and will print a straight line of the value of all the hands. So this is all there for testing. It's not necessarily during normal play. I'm gonna leave it there anyway, just for when we run it through. And then the hand rank gets changed to 5. Oh, sorry, I'm in the wrong one. Anyway, this is very similar to the straight flush one. But it is doing the same thing. So yeah. And then it's going to do a flush evaluate, which basically just checks each card to make sure it's the same suit. So obviously, if it does a straight evaluate and a flush evaluate, and it discovers that both are true, so if it establishes that the hands straighten, so they have a value that goes sequentially up by 1 for all 5 cards, and a flush means that they're all the same suit, then again, it's going to put the best hand as whatever, and the kicker is going to be the high card. It is impossible, to my knowledge, to have 2 straight flushes where anything besides 1 card is needed to break a tie. And so basically whoever has the highest card wins. And yeah, that assigns the rank of 9. The quad check and the full house check and the two pair check will all work fairly similarly. Again, it's going to go through, it will check the make ace high again. And the primary reason why it's doing that is to go through and make sure that the value is 14 for all the aces, because there's absolutely no value for them to be a 1. So it's just going to turn them all into 14s if they're set at 1s. And it's going to compare them. So there's two types of quads that you can have. There's n quads, which is the last 4 elements of the array all equal the same, or star quads, which is that the first 4 elements are all the same. And again, all it's going to do is it's going to, the first time it goes through, it's going to assign the hand rank to it, and the kicker, which is going to be the card that's not one of the pairs, is going to be added there. The main value will, of course, be the value of the quads, of one of the quads, for comparison purposes. And then the else if statements here are basically if I find another quads, which is highly unlikely, it will see if it's a better quads. And the only reason why this is here is basically because the kicker will occasionally be higher on other iterations, quite probably, I suppose. So it basically tries to find the best kicker, and it won't bother going through this unless it finds a better kicker. And this works exactly the same way. It checks the first 4 to see if there's a start quads, and it does the same thing. So the quads found variable is basically telling it whether or not it should be going through here looking for the first quads, or whether or not it should be making sure that comparing it by kicker. The boat check works pretty much similarly the same. You can have a boat at the start, or you can have a boat at the end. And I'm talking about, so a boat or a full house, as it's more commonly known, I guess, amongst people that don't play a lot of poker. It consists of 3 cards that are exactly the same, plus 2 cards that are exactly the same. So a triple set and a pair. So a start boat is when the triple set is at the beginning, and an end boat would be when the triple is at the end. It works pretty much exactly as the quad check, so I'm not going to go too in depth into that, but the important thing to remember is that all of these will assign values. When we're comparing the cards, the first thing that we're going to look at is the hand rank. And then after that, we're going to go into the main value, and then the second value, and then the kicker. And then after that, it will check the 4th card and the 5th card when comparing in the case of a tie. So usually it'll be broken by hand rank. But because it's a heads-up poker game, it's actually pretty likely that both players will have junk, in that, kind of a high card type thing, or pairs that are the exact same pair on the board or whatever. So ultimately we want to just get through it as fast as possible. So as soon as if it compares hand ranks, we're good to go, and then it will just go through the comparisons lower than that as necessary. So yeah, ultimately the hand rank thing is a very important thing to be changed, because it helps with the main loop that I showed you before. The flush check is going to go through, and it's going to do the flush evaluate thing, which I'll go through later, but it literally compares all 5 cards and just makes sure that they all have the same suit. And again, it works by the same principle, right? So if a flush hasn't been found yet, and it's been evaluated as being a flush, it will assign as the best card. It will do all this, and the flush is one of those ones where we need variables all the way down to the 5th card. The only value that really matters in comparison 9 times out of 10 is the hand rank. So it doesn't really matter how you organize these. For example, if I only compare quad checks using a kicker, and I never change the main value, second value, or whatever, but in the straight flush, like the main value got changed or whatever, it won't really matter that much ultimately, because ultimately the only thing we have to make sure of is that the values get changed in the order that we want them assessed to avoid conflicts. So normally even though something might be called a kicker, the main value will always be the value of the top pair or the most significant card in a hand. The second value might be traditionally in poker called a kicker in a particular hand type, like for example, four of a kind with an ace kicker, but we would probably prefer that to be called a second value because that's going to be the order that it's done in. And this is the exact order it's going to be compared in after hand rank. So hand ranks compared, then main value, then second value, then kicker, then fourth card, then fifth card. So for anybody out there that actually knows poker, kicker isn't always literally the kicker. It's literally the third thing that would be compared in a hand. Sometimes the second value would be the actual kicker. But for anybody that doesn't play poker, this is just probably too much baseball for you. So again, same logic, right? It's going to confirm that there's a flush, and if there hasn't been one found before, it'll just instantly assign the values to. Else, it's going to go through and it's going to check the fourth card in there, so the next card, and it'll check it and make sure that it's good to go. And again, because of the nature of this and because every card counts in this, it's actually going to go down all the way to the fifth card for comparisons. And if that's higher, it'll just keep iterating it up every time it finds any card combination that gives any of the five cards a higher value after the first. So, and this is the same way that the high card's going to work. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so the straight check again is going to run the straight evaluate, which I talked to you about briefly. Again, it just makes sure that the value of the hands are sequential. The ace checks will basically sort everything by value just by default at the end of the ace check. So one good thing about the ace check is that it will make sure that the order is fine at the end. So anytime we're evaluating the hands, they've already been assorted from the smallest value to the largest value. So it makes it easier for doing comparisons in a lot of cases, having it set up that way. So the straight evaluation, again, works by the same logic. It's going to, if there hasn't been a straight found, it will instantly, after it's found a straight, just assign them all of these values. And then if a straight has already been found, it's going to go through and it's just going to check the fourth card, the most significant card, the highest value card, and see if it's greater than, and go through. Because that's all that really matters for a straight. It's impossible to, like, once you know the value of the highest card, then the rest are all one less than it as you go left. Trips check again is going to look, so if you think about the 5 possible positions of cards, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as an example, the trips can either be at the end, at the start, or the very 3 in the middle. So this is going to work a lot like our boat check in that it's going to compare, or our quads check, I guess, is going to compare, because this is the one that's checking for end trips, it's going to check the second, third, and fourth and compare them. So it's going to compare 2 and 3 and 3 and 4 and make sure that they match in value using the card value thing, card value property of the card that we're looking at. And again, same logic. It's just going to look to see has trips been found before, and if not, then this is the trips. And if a trips has been found, it's going to compare the kicker. And in theory, we could go a little deeper than that because it is trips, but that's as far as I went on this one. So you can already see that the only thing I do is I see if the value of card 1 is a higher than the kicker, and if not, it'll modify it. Technically, I can go 1 card deeper, so I could actually change this comparison into the second value, and then call that one second value instead, and then make one that checks card combos hands 0 card value compared to kicker, and as a second level below this. But I didn't do that. I probably should have, and you can do that if you want. But it's yeah. In fact, I will probably do that later, but I'm not going to do it right now. So Uh, it's pretty good homework if you're trying to understand how this works a little bit better. And you can see examples of this logic being used when in the flush comparison that we had above and in the high card below, how that works. Yeah, so none of this should be a surprise. It does the same thing. It just compares the trips, and if it hasn't been found before, it tries to see if there's one with a better kicker, and it does it for all three of those positions. So the first group here is for checking for end trips, which is the last three cards being matched. And then it checks middle trips, which is the second, third, and fourth being matched. And then it checks start trips, which is the first, second, and third part of the array being checked. Two pair is very, very similar to the full house one, except the difference being, of course, that it actually will have a kicker. Because you have two pairs, the last card that's not one of the pairs, that would be the kicker. So the high pair would be the main value, the low pair will be the second value, and the kicker will be the kicker. And the hand rank is 3. And the pair check is very similar to the trips check, except it has more positions to check, because you can have, if you have like 5 cards, then the first and second could be a pair, the second and third could be a pair, the third and fourth can be a pair, and the fourth and fifth can be a pair. So you have to compare all of those. But the logic's all the same through it. It's very simple. And the high card, of course, literally compares basically the first thing it looks for is high cards. So the very first card it gets through, it's going to say, oh, this is the high card. So even if that number is 7 or something like that, it's still going to be that's the high card, and it will build that as the best one. And then after that, after the high card's been started, the next one will compare the main value to the right most significant card, which after we run the make case high will be already sorted, so that the fourth element, or the fifth element, which is 4 there, will have the most significant. So any other card we go through, if its card value is higher than the current main value, then it will assign that, etc. And it's going to go all the way through the list and compare, um, going through the up to the fifth card. So the first comparison just compares to see if the fourth card is higher than the main value, and if it is, it sets it. But if it's not, then it will go through and it'll say, well, what about the third value? Is the third value comparative to the other hand? And then it'll do, what about the fourth, etc., all the way down to the end. And then the hand rank will be 1. And again, the important values we need for comparison later will be the main value, which will be the highest card, second highest card, third highest card, fourth highest card, last card. And just keep those values in there for comparison. The sort by value is a little custom function using the sort. So it compares the 2 card values, and this just auto sorts things by the parameter that you gave it, which I believe I've used before, but it's good to mention. It's kind of a handy little function to know, and it's in the docs. If you look for sorts in the GDScript docs, you can get kind of a basic understanding of how this works. Although the last example I saw wasn't necessarily great, but great for comprehension. I'm sure it was a fine enough example if you knew enough computer science. Okay, so again, the ace check here, it will compare all of those looking for that 4. I think I already went through this. The make ace high will go through and convert. Yeah, I did those for sure. Print card values, I've used this function before, but it's basically used for testing to have it print out all the card values within a hand. And the straight evaluate is actually pretty elegant in that all it does is after it's sorted out, which would have been done in the function that called this, sorted them out by value, it's pretty easy to compare them, because the first one, basically for the farther right you are from the initial card, you subtract 1 from. So for the first card you'll subtract 1, the next one you'll subtract 2, the next one you'll subtract 3, and the next one you'll subtract 4. And in theory, all of those will equal the same. So after it's done that, it will compare them, and if they all are equal, then it returns true, else it returns false. And yeah, so ultimately we're going to make variables for the flush evaluate that just goes through all 5 cards and determines the card suit as the variable, and then it compares them all. And if all of them are equal, it returns true, otherwise it returns false. So that's a lot of talking about a basic function. I'm going to show you next exactly how I'm going to implement that. But first, one thing I'm going to talk about quickly is that when I was thinking about how this was going to be implemented, I decided that in the game itself, we're actually going to use player data in a dictionary form. So rather than using the variables that I originally showed you to hold the high cards, whole cards, etc., they're all going to be stored in a dictionary for both the player and the enemy. So what this changes basically is that we have to make sure that we change all of our variables to refer to the dictionary instead of the dictionary that we created. Obviously, in the demo here, we have it. I created the demo. I expanded it to match more of our codes. So there's actually hand code that has the same stuff as our hand scene and the enemy hand scene and the table hand scene. They're basically all the same, so they can do draw cards and stuff. So I basically made it deeper into the simulation to make it so we can just copy and paste it over. So if you feel like it, you can start doing the work on that. Actually, I'm just going to include this as the source so you can look at it, and we'll talk a little bit more about dictionaries in the next video. So yeah, in the next video, we're going to implement this system, and we're going to modify the UI so it's a little bit more effective. That should be our second last video, and then the third last one, we're going to do a bit of debugging and finish the game loop so that it works a little better. We're not going to add a ton of polish to it. It goes beyond the scope of this project. I'm not going to make an ultra polished game out of it. For example, the UI, I probably would have made it so that it displayed text in 2 different ways, so that when it had lengthy messages, like comparing the hands of the players, it would display a different type of text rather than having that slowly fade in, fade out text effect that we have in the game. But I think I've taught enough that you can figure out how to implement that yourself. So that's the end of this video, and we'll see you again for the next one.